Hi, everyone. This is a webinar that discusses criticality and the habits of mind. And it's specially geared towards the Lingerers group, which meets once a month. And it's for people who feel like they may have been at it a little longer, or it's a little harder graduate journey than they had anticipated for any number of reasons. But we often talk about things that have a wider appeal, and this is one of them. This is part of a series of things that we're discussing this year that are geared towards how do we increase the pace? How do we keep our mind and our work-life relationships solid so that this burden that is graduate work at the end can be done without driving ourselves and our families crazy? So that's what we're talking about. And specifically, starting with some quotes from other people. When we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work. And when we no longer know which way to go, we have begun our real journey. The mind that is not baffled is not employed. The impeded stream is the one that sings. Now, I don't know that everyone would agree with Wendell Berry, because, but it does say that when we are baffled and we do feel as though we've run into a lot of impediments, that we are up against the stuff that makes us grow. And Arthur Costa, who's one of the authors that I'll talk about in some depth today, says the habits of mind are the 16 attributes that human beings display when they are behaving intelligently. So we're going to look at, with some depth, at those 16 attributes, because then they lead us on to critical thinking, which is not something you do once with an issue and then drop it. It requires that we update our knowledge as new information comes in. Time spent evaluating claims is not just time well spent. It should be considered part of an implicit bargain we've all made. And that's what we're talking about today, is the habit of mind that gets us to that implicit bargain. So what are our goals? Well, each of us will, in our own reflective moments, consider our own habits of mind. And then we want to look at what criticality is, specifically the Socratic method, and think about it in terms of being a habit of mind. And then we'll look at the end about how to apply those ideas to next steps as we all get our graduate grooves on. So that's our agenda: considering the habits of mind, looking at criticality, a few exercises, and then I've got some news. All right. The work of the habits of mind is a phrase that wouldn't have been in the literature very much, at least a decade ago. It's in the last decade, 12, 13 years, that two people, Costa and Kalick, have really developed it, came up with this list of 16. It's been well published, and now it's beginning a phrase. It's kind of like the work about mind. Oh, I'm forgetting both her name and how her work is described. But she, all of a sudden, everybody started saying, oh, this is my, and we put our way of thinking into a box about mindset. And the original work was on a growth mindset or a fixed mindset, but now people are talking about mindset in lots of ways. Well, habits of mind is something else that is along that same line, also based on research, based on learning research. So there's 16 of them. Let's look at them And as you are looking at them, start in your chat ones that you think you want, just the number of ones you think you want to work on. Carol Dweck, thank you, Jane. That's exactly who I was thinking of. Carol Dweck and mindset. All right, so the first habit of mind is persisting and keeping at something. Success seems to be connected with action. Successful people keep moving. So that if we persist with a problem, we not only think about it, but we take action on it. Managing impulsivity. One of the things we certainly talk about here when we're talking about procrastination, being goal-directed, self-imposed delay of gratification, being able to know that we have to get some work done before we go do something else. Listening with understanding and empathy, not thinking about what we're going to say next, but really listening to the person and to the tone and maybe to the heart of what the person is saying. Wisdom is the reward for a lifetime of listening. Let the wise listen and add to their learning. Let the discerning get guidance. Think flexibly. Of all the forms of mental activity, the most difficult to induce, even in the minds of the young, is flexibility. It's the art of handling the same bundle of data as before, but placing it in a new system and in new relations. So take a second in your if any of these made you go, oh yeah, I think I want a little bit more of that one, just put in the number. We have 3 more pages to go. So 5 to 8, thinking about thinking. Metacognition is something that we discuss in Doctoral Net frequently. If you are a researcher, then reflective and reflexive practice, very important. Striving for accuracy. Confucius said a man who has committed a mistake and doesn't correct it is committing another mistake. And doing diligence requires that we strive for accuracy. Questioning and posing problems, which we will look at in much more detail with the Socratic method, and applying past knowledge to new situations. I think the Thomas Edison quote is interesting because you are in an he was in an iterative, innovative process when he said that. Striving for accuracy, Sarah mentions, and it's really one that requires diligence when you're coming up to examination. We need to also think about the way we think and perhaps put ourselves in the company of others who think differently, who will then be bold enough to question the way we think. Thinking and communicating with clarity and precision. This is what happens when we write. Naturally, it happens. We think with greater clarity, and then when we put that writing up for peer review, it's broken down and we do it again, which helps us think again. Thinking is such a, it's like a muscle, isn't it? If we don't push it all the time to the point where it gets tired, it doesn't actually get much stronger. Gathering data through all the senses. Interesting that Henry James is the quote there because he's a pragmatist. And so the necessity of gathering data from every part of our senses in order to make the most of it. Creating, imagining, innovating. Some of us just really like that and are trying to do it all the time, and the others would prefer not to. The future is not someplace we are going, but one we are creating in our bodies and our minds, as well as in everything else. Responding with wonderment and awe. This is the one I personally am working on in terms of building a new habit of mind. To me, it's like, it feels like a secret of life is to respond with wonderment and awe. The most beautiful experience in the world is the experience of the mysterious. And I have to agree with Albert on that one. Taking responsible risks, not staying too much on either the too risky side or the not enough risk side. Pioneers who were not afraid of the wilderness, businessmen who were not afraid of failures, dreamers who were not afraid of action. Finding humor. Increase your brain power 3 to 5-fold simply by laughing and having fun while working on a problem. Ooh, I have to put in 14 on that one. Thinking independently. Being willing to share your thoughts with the group even when they don't agree with you. And letting the group give you things you wouldn't have thought of. Interdependence, which is actually the reason I love doing webinars, because it helps all of us continue on our path together. And then remaining open to continuous learning. So for those of you that were maybe stashing them, anybody else have some numbers to hit enter on? And then let's go back and look at see what they take. We may have tools for each other. So Sarah was the first one to put up habit of the mind, striving for accuracy. How can we help? What ways, what things do we think about? How do we strive for accuracy? So one thing I will give you on that one, Sarah, is that the Socratic method will help with that, and it's something we'll discuss in a minute. I would also say look for the data that disagrees with the norm. Because one of the things about accuracy is it needs to have both edges defined. And then you can much more accurately paint the picture of the stronger evidence because you've not denied the weaker evidence. Anybody else? Proofing is your weak point. Proofing numbers or proofing words? Okay, some secrets on words. Do you read your paragraphs out loud? That's one thing, because that engages your mind as well as your ears, as well as your mind. And for people who just can't stand that, they have the computer read it to them. But actually, I get much more if I just make myself read my stuff out loud. Second thing is to go through every heading and then off to the right as a comment, look at each paragraph and write down one few word phrase about what the point of that paragraph is. That way you'll catch a paragraph that has more than one point, which should be separated into a couple. And also you'll be able to then separately analyze whether or not all the points in order make the best sense or whether you want to rearrange some of your paragraphs. Those two things are my favorite for proofing. Okay, let's look at some other people's here. Habits of mind. Jane says 1 and just recently 9. Well, let's look at 1. Persisting. Aha. Habit of mind with persistence, I think, comes with our, I'm going to call them mental gremlins. Jane, have you had some mental gremlins that have been keeping you, or just too much on your plate? The mental gremlins, number one is just recently. Too much on your plate. Okay, so then the secret to too much on our plate is to go to, in my opinion, what works for me, besides the just organizing of it through kanbanflow.com, is the secret of the habits of seven habits of effective people, which is to keep your eye on quadrant 2, which is the non-urgent. The too much on your plate challenge gets to be that the urgent, which kind of employs our solar plexus, takes over, and the non-urgent, which is the growth portion, falls away. So that's the habit of mind, for me, in my experience, that has kept persisting as strong as it can be, is to keep my eye away from the urgent, and to keep it on the growth. And then one was just recently, and then your other one was 9, which is thinking and communicating with clarity and precision. That has to do with from different angles, doesn't it? If we write and then we draw out what we're thinking, and then we think about, we put it out there to our worst or best critic, we brainstorm it with other people, we take in those other ideas, all of those things. And then we have to be nice to ourselves, because it's a spiral. Thinking and communicating with clarity and precision are a spiral. We don't get them right. We have to keep redoing them. Helpful, Jane? If not, tell me more. And maybe if other people, Wayne, welcome. We're currently going through the 16 habits of mind, talking about the ones that may have a bugaboo for us. And if they are, kind of talking about tools that help. So Sally Ann, also 9. It's not done in a day. We write and then we revise. And we know that we haven't communicated with clarity and precision when others can't understand us. But when it comes into writing in a PhD or master's level series, then we have to open ourselves up to our reviewers, who help us understand what can be more precise and what isn't clear. I think mine are the fun ones, keeping my mind, finding humor. And anybody have any secrets on finding humor in things? Or the other one is awesome, responding with wonderment and awe. And one of you in another webinar turned us on, meaning the Doctoral Net office, onto an app called Calm. And so it's a tool that is helping with both of those things. Anybody else have something on those? Or another habit of mind you want to discuss before we move on? I think what we have to know here is that none of these happen overnight. They are habits. And when one grows, sometimes we lose our space on another one. That's just life. It's a spiral. And with that, open to continuous learning is kind of the capstone that does it for all of us. Now, this started with a conversation a couple months ago when we started the Lingerers group for this term. And it was clear that everybody wanted to kind of consider this question about critical thinking. And so it became one of the things we decided to talk about. The word criticality was interesting. When I used it, I wasn't actually sure it was a word. And I because we think of it in terms of critical thinking, critical analysis, critical something. But to me, I thought there was probably an underlying energy that was criticality. And so I looked it up. And I think it is worthy of a few moments of reflection, because the processes, it's defined as the processes involved in being critical and thinking critically. The ability to come quickly to question or define quality, state, or degree of being of the highest importance. So there is something about criticality which puts us on a series, a continuum, and our ability to think or be critical, we have to somehow understand the greatest side of that continuum in order for us to critically place what we're looking at on it. You see what I'm saying? It isn't a habit of criticality isn't just, oh, I look at everything with a critical view, but rather I think a little bit more deeply about what I'm looking at in terms of the continuum upon which it will be judged. And then I am able to critically analyze this place on that continuum. Why is that important to you? It's important to you because you are all creating documents that will be judged by outside examiners, and they have this continuum in their minds. They don't have the whole continuum. The whole continuum is so vast. It's all of academic writing. It is all of research. So we can't all have it. But we do have the portions of it that we have when we come to examine student work. It involves the discussion of how the idea or circumstance may be at risk if not attended to. Now, this is how people in manufacturing look at criticality. That it's our discussion is based on the consequence of failure. So again, your examiners, their job is, you might think their job is to help make your work better. And in an ideal world, that would be true. But in reality, their job is to keep your work out of the university spectrum of publication if it isn't any good. So the consequence of failure is the university looks bad. And so it's interesting for you to realize that as in the risk of failure, if the editors in a journal don't point out the way in which the logic of the article seems to be flawed, then the entire work of the journal is seen to go down. And I gave you a link of some work on criticality that might have more if you're interested in delving into it. Well, then that takes us logically into this question of what makes an argument. Because if your argument is weak, your whole work is at risk. That's the essence of the examination process, is all around this other question, which is equally kind of nebulous and continues to be iterative, and we learn more and more about it with time, which is what is an argument? How do we make an argument? There's 4 or 5 different steps, depending on who's writing you're reading, but it starts with a claim. These are the findings. These are what you want your discussion to have in research. This is what you want your reader to come out with and believe you in when you finish. You have evidence or data that lead to that claim. So your task is to tie the evidence you have to the claim you want to make. You do that through a warrant, they call it sometimes, or the reasoning. And that's the entire research process. Now, somewhere in there, if you're not going to be hit with the claim about being biased. You're also discussing the possible counters or rebuttal or divergent data or whatever it is, but the outliers. And then you want to be able to say at the end, you can restate this claim because in spite of the outliers, your warrant or reasoning held, the evidence was good, the claim is true. Sounds really easy when we break it out into these things, but this is the funnel through which you are getting your reader to go. And it's useful actually to have it up on the wall as you write, because you can get so tied up as we write into what we're saying that we forget where we're taking our reader. And at the end of the day, where we're taking our reader is the essence of what our work is. So all of this criticality habit comes together when we sit in rooms and we look at things from different viewpoints. And that's actually the secret of what we're talking about today. Once you have an argument, then you put that argument up for other people to tear apart. And they may do it on a number of slants. They may look at it from another of slants. They may question your theoretical. They may your basic foundations of theory that drive it. They may question the concepts that you're putting together and how you layer them together. They may question your evidence or your data, or they may bring into your topic other trends that other people are doing and ask you to question your argument from the viewpoint of those other trends. They also may look at it of your argument from literature. Is your argument based accurately enough in research? Is it reasonable? Have you considered these outside outliers? Where is your argument in the main part of the bell curve, or is it on one of the far edges? And how does all that work together? That's just general. All of these things, all of these elements of thought come into other people and ultimately you questioning your work critically. So they may question whether or not your purpose, your goal, and your objective went together. They may question the issue. That's very basic. You shouldn't get to defense if those things are too questionable. But they may, at the final go, question some of your data, some of your facts. They may have you drill into your experiences. And you can go around the rest of this, your point of view, your implications. So it's useful. The reason I gave you this slide, and all of these are up in the handouts, the reason I gave you this slide is because there's several sections to writing and working. One of them is we just have to get it down. We have to figure out our own flow. We need to get to what our argument is. But once that's down, then we can look at our work from these different reference points and help proofread, help consider other points of view as we go. The most definitive way to do that is something called the Socratic method. And there are 6 kinds of questions. They may be clarification questions. Why do you say that? How does this relate to this broader question? And you can actually look at the Socratic method and you will see the questions that your examiners will ask you. They'll be defined to your work, they'll be defined to your field and your research, but the Socratic method holds true across any kind of critical questioning. So we ask for clarification. We may probe assumptions. If you've ever written for a journal or when you write for a journal, that's going to be a big one. Anytime, I'm a big assumer. I never know until I get my reviewer comments back. And then everything I assumed seems to be laid out in front of me. which requires me to go back to verify, to prove or disprove that assumption in depth. Very useful to have somebody look at your work in terms of the assumptions you're making. Also reasons and evidence. Why do you say this? Exactly what is your evidence? What your evidence is analogous to? What do you think causes this to happen? Why? Viewpoints and perspectives. What would be an alternative? What's another way to look at it? Pushing you outside of what you've already thought. What are strengths and weaknesses of your argument? Are there things that are similar? Is there a counter argument? Probing implications. What generalizations have you made? Can you make? What are the consequences of that? Is there something implied? And questions about the questions. Well, why, when you look at your research questions, can they ask you what was the point of that question? Why do you think, what should your reader think about how it was asked? What does some portion of your question mean exactly? How does this apply to your life, to your outcomes, to your field? So these are the basic, you can look up Socratic questions and you'll get lots and lots of them. I am suggesting that over the course of the summer, instead of doing Lingerers group, we'll do meetups, and I'll just put out everybody who wants to have other people ask Socratic questions, clarifying their work, show up and put in some writing. And then people can pair off, or we can work in groups depending on how many come, and we can look at these different kinds of questions. It's useful to work in groups about our work, and it's also useful for us to work about other people's work because, and this takes us back to where I started today, it strengthens our habit of mind. And you know what? There's always, always, always strengthening that can be done. Just like our muscles, we need to strengthen our mind. Before I move on, raise your hand if you have any questions about this, and I'll wait for you to type. Anybody? Does it make sense? Is it useful? Can you write and then take a few days off, go on a little holiday, come back, and then pull out these questions and look at your own work with them? Or do you think it's more useful to have other people look? These are just what I hope to do here, is set up good exercises. So with that, we've talked a little bit about what's hardest for you, but now it's good to put them together. So questioning and problem posing, if 7 is difficult, then Socratic questioning is good. If 4 is difficult, then Socratic questioning is good if other people throw it at you. If you're striving for accuracy, Socratic questioning is really good because it'll set you up on the things you're not thinking about. This whole conversation hopefully is good for you thinking about your thinking. Number 5, thinking and communicating with clarity is excellent if people are questioning your writing. And all of that is taking a responsible risk, and hopefully together we'll do it interdependently and we can find humor, because we are silly human beings, or silly, and academic human beings are perhaps some of the silliest, that we spend so much time on things that other people don't hardly look at. So think about for yourself, and then put in one here. Which of these questions are hard for you to do? You don't do them naturally. Clarifying questions, probing assumptions, probing the rationale behind the thought, questioning a viewpoint, probing consequences. Actually, are there, maybe I should ask questions on the question, Annaline says. For me, I don't probe assumptions nearly well enough. Anybody else see obvious weakness in themselves that they think would be good to be working on? Or maybe there's some things you do really well. Probing rationale. That's looking under what you see on the surface. I think we all naturally have things that we excel at here and things we don't. And we fall back on what we do well. So a good exercise is to look up the Socratic questions that go with the one you don't do well. And then to see if you can, as a habit of mind, begin to ask those questions more. And as with all habits, tracking them helps. So I've mentioned this in other times. This was a tool I found this year. When I use it, I feel better than when I don't. And I try to keep, every quarter, I try to bring on a couple new habits and then track how many days I actually did that habit until it begins to feel like it's closer to my surface than it was before. So raise your hand if you think a meetup where we did this as a group or in small pairs, or people went off in a private space and came back or something, would you come? Annaline would come. Anybody else? Well, it doesn't getting maybe. Okay, we have a 1.5. Ideas to be worked on. We'll see what happens. We have private spaces. There is no reason that students can't use Big Marker to work with each other. And so we're going to push some of those boundaries this summer and see if they turn out to be useful tools. If people don't come, timing, Wayne, thank you. And that's it, too. It might be that timing is an issue, and we'll see if how that works. You know, Jane, you could make sure you did it for your best benefit. So editing. Everybody, here's my underlying thought about it, is everybody needs more editing than they get. And then they come and it's a big deal. It's a very expensive deal to get your whole thing edited. So I've been trying to think about how small groups and meetups might be used for editing. Okay, so Sarah, you're at DCU. DCU won't allow you to. It's a university rule. You cannot have your piece copy edited. It happens to be one I completely disagree with, because I write books. Sage copy edits my work, and we have to go back and forth with an outsourced copy editor. And it doesn't mean that everyone at DCU wouldn't sometimes get outsourced, but it does mean DCU expects you to do your own editing. And if that's the stance, definitely move up on the scale this idea that we're going to play with this summer, because we think do your own editing might be a reason that people would come. Okay, just to tell you, if you haven't gotten our apps, do so. And you sign into the app with the sign-in that you use on your Doctoral Net member. So if you're one of our university members, you sign into the app the same way you sign into the website, and that'll give you the app for your university. So there you have it. That's our news. Now, I'm going to turn off the recording. Thanks, everybody who was coming by recording. What we're doing next is having a talk about whether or not we're meeting our goals and helping each other if we have ideas about how that can get better. So thank you all for watching by recording, those who didn't make it today. Okay, recording's done.